Hi, today I'm going to show you how to magnetize a portion of the Stormwolf or StormFang used by the Space Wolves. And what I've noticed is that in 40K, in changing editions, I've only been playing since 7th edition, but the role of ships and other units will change over time. So it can be difficult to know if you're going to use a las cannon or if you're going to use a missile on this particular ship. Instead, rather than worrying about which role it's going to play, I'm going to use magnets so I can be able to switch between the las cannon or a missile if I'd like to. You can see here how I've put magnets in, and on the back side I'm using plasticard that you can use. It's styrene plastic, and I've got a magnet that's been put in. The challenge is that the plastic piece that comes with the las cannon and the missile both have a piece of plastic built into it, so I've needed to cut that off and then used a piece of styrene on the back and be able to fix that in. Now you can see here's a las cannon, and there's a magnet that I've already put into the las cannon. This is a sample Stormwolf that I've already been working on. I'm doing two at the same time. And with that magnet, then with its polarity set, I can attach it to the Stormwolf or StormFang as I need, place it in, and there you go. Easy to remove, and I'll show you with the missile as well. There's the missile, and there you go. Alright, so how can you make this happen yourself? Here is the other Stormwolf, StormFang that I'm working on. You can see that there's a magnet in there, and I can do the same thing for the other side. You also notice on that other side that there's a little bit of putty there that hasn't been removed. I'll be able to file that down later and show you how to do that. Make it nice and clean when I want to have the final version. So what do you need? You need styrene, and in this case I'm using 0.08 inch in terms of its depth. I'm going to make a cut in the styrene so that I can glue that into place in the body of the ship. And in this case I'm going to use a miter saw and a miter box, both metal. You might have a plastic version, and that's fine as well. You'll see that we won't have to cut all the way down in the miter box. I take my styrene. Now I could just put it in, guess at what the width would be, and make the cut. However, that's not going to be quite as efficient in case I'm not really lucky. So I'm going to measure it up on the body. And there are two ways of cutting it. So I could do it lengthwise. However, when I go to put that in, I'd have to make the cut lengthwise, which is a little bit more difficult, and I'm going to have to make two cuts, really. Whereas instead, if I go widthwise here, I can use my hobby knife to make a cut, small incision, so that I'll know where I want to cut off the styrene. So I want to mark it just enough so that I'll be able to see it when I make the cut in the miter box. Alright, so I line up the piece of styrene, grab the saw, line it up, make sure I'm holding the plastic piece tight down in the miter box. So I'm putting pressure down and towards the outer edge so I can make a cut. Nice thing is I don't have to cut all the way through. See, I've scored it there, and all I have to do now is break it off. There you go, a nice clean cut. So let's see if we got lucky. Did we do this right? There's the body. Place it through, almost to the top. Not bad for first shot. A little bit sticking out the back, and that's fine. I'm going to grab, in this case I have a rasp file if it's a metal file. If you don't have a rasp file, you can use sandpaper, and in this case what I've done is I've taken sandpaper and popsicle stick. I've used super glue to affix the sandpaper to both sides of the popsicle stick, so you can use that as well. That's 600 grit in that case. So instead I'm going to use my rasp file. What I've done off camera is I've filed down with the rasp file the piece, and I even made a notch in the corner. And the reason why I need to make a notch is there's a notch on the model, it wouldn't fit all the way through. And you can either do this with clippers or with your file or sandpaper with a knife, something that's going to make that little corner. And there we have a pretty good fit. I could either put the magnet in directly now, I'd drill a hole and put the magnet in, but it might not be as easy to get the exact spot I want while it's in there, especially if I'm going to be putting pressure on it. If I glue it down and then drill a hole, it might push through. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a mark. You can either use a pencil, in this case I'm using a permanent marker, doesn't matter, I'm going to drill around it. If I make a mark now, I'll be able to pull a piece off and then drill the hole. That's roughly center. Rather than, so I'm going to use a 2mm magnet, and it's a little bit of a larger hole. Rather than starting off with a 2mm bit, I'm going to drill a pilot hole. So it's a smaller hole. I'm going to use my pin vise, take the piece out, and try to get close to the center as possible with this. Even if I miss a little bit, I'll be able to correct that with the larger 2mm bit. Notice I have my finger, my index finger, behind the piece. That's to give it enough support to start drilling the hole, but I'm not going to keep it there the whole time. I obviously don't want to have the bit go through my finger. If you don't have a pin vise, you could turn the bit by hand. I'd recommend against using a power drill to do that. You could either injure yourself or damage the material. I like the pin vise though because I can turn the pin vise without it affecting the position of where I'm drilling. So the 2mm size that I have is too large for the pin vise, so I'm going to do this by hand. And here I want to make sure that I am finding center because that is where the magnet is going to go. Making sure I don't have my finger behind there so I don't pierce my skin. I'm checking it a few times to make sure I'm getting a good clean circle drilled and that I'm not going to hurt myself. And as it goes through, now I can clean out the bits of plastic, and there you go. Let's do a test. See if it's going to look correct. Yeah, not bad. I can put the magnet now in after I've glued it. However, it's not as easy as doing that with the piece out. Alright, so I'm going to use a 2mm magnet in that hole. just to show you how it's going to work. Now you got to make sure you have the right polarity. And what I've done with since I already have a hole drilled and I have a las cannon, a test las cannon, what I'm going to do is put the magnets with the correct polarity for the las cannon, and then I know that that end is going to be the one that needs to touch the piece of styrene. Once it's in there, the magnets will continue working that way. Grab my super glue. I'm going to put a bead of super glue on the end. So I've just stacked a few of the magnets together. I have about 4 or 5 of them, just to make it a little easier to fit the hole. And a nice thing about this particular case is there's a notch in the styrene, so even if I put the piece down, I know which end the magnets need to go in. So I put the magnet in and I kind of tear it away. I turn it and slide my finger out of the way so that the magnet stays in and I'm not grabbing it with the other magnets and pulling it away. It's not exactly flush, so I'm going to use a piece of plastic to push it back out. Do not use a piece of metal like a bit, because if you did, it's going to attract the magnet and you might end up pulling the magnet out. That's a little bit more flush. I'm going to take my popsicle stick and just make sure that it is flush. Okay, let's do a test fit. I can glue it in place. I'm going to use my model glue. And I'm going to put a bead at the bottom edge, which will end up being the top of the piece of styrene. You don't want a lot in there, just enough to make a little dab. Just get rid of some of this extra old glue. And a little bit at the top edge. That's the face of the extra bit of styrene that's going to stick out. Now I can place it in, and there we go, a nice snug fit. What's great about a snug fit is that you won't have as much won't have a lot of gaps that you'll have to fill with putty. A little bit sticks out the bottom, and that's okay because once the hull is put on, it's going to cover that up. I could cut it down to size, but there's really no need to do that. And it'll work the same way as the las cannon there. I don't want to test it right away because I want the glue to set properly. Now I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I'm going to use, in this case, some Viejo plastic putty, and there's a little bit of a gap along that side there, so I just have to apply some of the putty. And again, I don't want to get a lot on the body because I'll have to spend more time filing it down. What's nice about this piece of, or this type of putty, is that it's got a fine point. It only has a little bit out and you know exactly where you're going to place it. Notice that I did cover the magnet, and that's okay because it's a rare earth magnet. It's fairly strong, and the magnet's still going to work through that and even paint. Once it dries, I'm going to use sandpaper to get rid of the excess putty and make things nice and smooth. I start off with 600 grit, which gets rid of most of the extra material, and then I go to 1000 grit to make it a nice smooth surface. You could go to 15,000 or 1500 or 2000 if you'd rather. It just depends on how picky you are. Hope this tutorial has been helpful, and as I work through the rest of the model, I'll share some additional video.